Welcome to Glasgow Rangers Nation. I'm Aaron James. This is your Rangers news channel, guys. Just kind of finally getting around to watching the Talk Sport interchange between Simon Jordan and Graeme Souness. Always very interesting, no matter what you think of Simon Jordan. The guy is always good for a bit of a wind-up. I think Graeme Souness rose to it slightly yesterday during the interview, but some interesting talking points came from that interview that Souness gave when he appeared on the White and Jordan program. That's right, White and Jordan was it Jim White, isn't it? And Simon Jordan. I think there's some really interesting points that came out of what he discussed and what was discussed by the pair. Obviously, the headline for me that came out of the sort of interchange of views between the two was that Graeme Souness has branded the Rangers board in completely lacking in any sort of football knowledge. I think it was really telling that, he talked very much about the fact that in all his time talking to the board, interacting with the board as regards obviously the management recruitment process and anything post that, he says that, the board have absolutely zero football knowledge. They are just genuinely completely clueless when it comes to football, which is extremely worrying considering the influence that the likes of John Bennett has over the recruitment process and over the running of the club. Some of this obviously could be bitterness at the fact that he wasn't obviously given the job that he was promised, allegedly promised, shall we say. He feels very much that since James Bisgrove has left the club, that there is no direct affirmative, positive decision-making taking place at the club in terms of at board level or executive level. I'd certainly, to be honest with you, having looked into the situation, listened to Graeme Souness talk, listened to the whole situation in terms of what's going on at the club, I'd echo what he's got to say. I genuinely believe that John Bennett and the entire Rangers board have about as much football knowledge as a single-cell amoeba that is in the special needs class. They really are very, very poor when it comes to that. And I would really genuinely urge the board to stay out of any football-making processes, that any football making decisions be left to Niels Coppen, Craig Robertson, Philippe Clement, and obviously we hopefully will hopefully get a CEO appointed very soon who actually knows the game, who actually understands the game. It's worrying, isn't it, that when an ex-manager, someone with such a vast experience in the Scottish game and in the English game and also in terms of Rangers as well, is branding a board as lacking in football knowledge. Simon Jordan, of course, bit back at this, stating that, he can't blame the board for obviously not winning the league title last season, which Souness obviously admitted. He said that was down to the players. Jordan tried to counter by saying that, well, if Rangers had won the league last season, would you have said that was good board decision-making process? And he said, no, that'd be down to the players. And I think Souness is right. Jordan perhaps showing his lack of understanding. Jordan obviously did sack 8 managers in God knows how many years when he was Palace owner. I think it's right. What happens in terms of winning and losing games is not down to the board. It's down to what is on the field. It's down to the players. It's down to the manager. And that is right. But the board do, I suppose, have a role to play in terms of how they back said manager and how they give that manager funds or the ability to go and recruit players and to work independently of them. I think the worrying sign here is that this board obviously lack that football understanding and lack that football knowledge to give the manager the correct backing and give the Niels Coppen the correct backing to actually go and be a success. Certainly very worrying indeed. But like I said, I think Souness is spot on. I do think this board have absolutely no knowledge of football whatsoever. And yes, they may be decent businessmen, although I would dispute that. But they have absolutely no knowledge of football. And when you've got people at the top of your profession or the top of your business running it, and they have no understanding of it, it is a very worrying situation. And it is quite telling that Souness said this, and Graeme Souness said that, and he admitted it openly, that he would actually say this to John Bennett's face, which is, shows the courage the man has. In terms of the other back and forth, they talked. Souness says that he doesn't feel the gap between Rangers and Celtic is that big this season, and he believes that it's still all to play for in terms of the league title, which is very accurate. We've only played 2 games. Celtic have played a very poor Kilmarnock team who've struggled at the start of the season, and obviously Hibernian, who always lay down and surrender to them anyway. We've obviously had the tough game at Tynecastle to start off the season with, and then obviously beat Motherwell on Saturday. He talked as well about the fact that, yes, it will be tough going to Parkhead on the 1st of September. as any time going to Parkhead, but he said that that it wouldn't be the first time that a Rangers team that wasn't fancied, that a Rangers team that perceivably had no hope of winning, went to Celtic Park and actually won the game. So he says that the gap isn't that big. He's not writing it off. Now Simon Jordan did make the counterpoint that, in his opinion, the gap is still massive. That Celtic, the Rangers have not laid a glove on Celtic in the last few seasons. In terms of league titles, I think Celtic have won sort of 12 league titles to our 1 in the last few years. And the situation is not great from that aspect, is it? The fact that they've won all those league titles and we haven't laid a glove on them in terms of that. Simon Jordan also commented that in his estimations, you looked at the performances last season, that Rangers were nowhere near beating Celtic at any point last season, which is concerning. Graeme Souness, of course, said that was not the case. He believed that we were closer to beating them. I think the truth probably lies somewhere in between what the two of them had to say, if I'm being very honest on this situation. I think the performances last season against Celtic in the Old Firm were, taking out the refereeing disasters, which of course there were a few, the performances were very poor. The first half at Ibrox in that very critical, pivotal game at the end of the season was absolutely dire. The first in the performance when Michael Beale was in charge right at the start of the season was absolutely dire. So I think there is some truth in what both of them are saying in this. Souness also commented that he was exceptionally disappointed that the Rangers hadn't strengthened enough yet over the summer. He said, of course, he had admitted there was still time for us to go and strengthen and to bring in new players, but he was very disappointed with the work the club had done so far. Quite telling, isn't it? I suppose the difference in how he thinks and how the board think in terms of strengthening the team. Look, I think we've done some very good on the positive side of things. We've done some very good business in terms of the young players we've brought into the club, the young players who hopefully will go on to help to fund this trading model and also will help to push Rangers on to great success. Connor Barron obviously been the top amongst them, who's been arguably the player of the season so far in what is a very young season. But overall, you've got to say that Souness is right. The strengthening has not been anywhere near enough. The strengthening has not push this team onto the next level. And you look at the team that runs out there on a Saturday or a Tuesday or a Wednesday or whenever it runs out, it is largely the same team bar a couple of players that were here last season. So you can't argue that last season's team was actually good enough to win the league. So there is slight concerns over that, and I do admit that Souness is very accurate in what he says on the fact that we have not yet strengthened enough. On the other side of it, of course, there is still some 17 days remaining in this window, so there is time still to obviously sign some players. Obviously the budgetary constraints are there, as we saw all too markedly with the comments by the manager on Yanis Hadji. But look, this board, I think, as Souness says, lack huge amounts of football knowledge. The interview was very entertaining between Jordan and Souness. There was some quite toing and froing. I think some of it was just on the wind up for the sake of the audience. It's a very interesting interview, guys. If you want to watch the whole thing, it's on Talk Sport. Go and give it a watch. But some interesting points that Graeme Souness raised in that interview. And look, no matter what you might think of the man or think of the man now, the guy has had a huge impact, or has had a huge impact on this club. He talks very well about the club, and it's clear that the guy has a passion and a love for Rangers still, which is very admirable. But I think sometimes that perhaps as fans and even the board need to listen when a senior person from the past, a senior person who actually knows football, who understands the game, who understands Rangers and understands what it is to be Rangers manager, talks. Some of it, but obviously I don't think some of you may brand his ramblings as just ramblings. But at the end of the day, Souness is a man who should be respected in the game for what he's achieved when he was at Rangers. He understands the Scottish game. His achievements are there for all to see, and he was part of that revolution that changed our club, that brought it back to being, the biggest club in one of the biggest clubs in Britain, one of the biggest clubs in Europe, one of the most successful clubs in Britain as well. It was his work with obviously Walter Smith that did that, and Graeme Souness will always be loved at the club for doing that. So some really interesting points came out of that interview yesterday. Guys, give it a watch. Let me know what you think. Thank you for watching Glasgow Rangers Nation. Guys, as always, please smash the sub. Help us to keep on growing. And on the way out, 2 favours I always ask. Number 1, smash the like. Number 2, remember always, we are the people.